Back to school is busy enough. The last thing you need is shopping that makes it harder. Whether you're moving into a dorm, your first apartment, or just getting organized for the semester, Wayfair makes it easy to get everything you need in one place. Furniture, bedding, storage, decor, study essentials, all at prices you'll love, with fast shipping before move-in day. Get everything you need for back-to-school season. Shop Wayfair.com today.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Tires matter. They're the only part of your vehicle that touches the road. Tread confidently with new tires from Tire Rack. Whether you're looking for expert recommendations or know exactly what you want, Tire Rack makes it easy. Fast, free shipping, free road hazard protection, and convenient installation options. Go to TireRack.com to see tire test results, tire ratings, and consumer reviews, and be sure to check out all the special offers. TireRack.com, the way tire buying should be.
Coming up on the Threat Status Podcast, we talk to Lieutenant General Brian Gibson, the Vice Director of the Golden Dome for America project, all about the developing missile shield, the fight in Washington over the program's funding, and how AI and other advanced technologies are being incorporated into the system. And then we break down the swirling questions over President Trump's secret flight out of Turkey and the Pentagon's acquisition of a bauxite mine in Guyana. And then Guy Taylor offers insights from the Space and Missile Defense Symposium in Huntsville, Alabama. Don't forget to go to WashingtonTimes.com and sign up for the daily Threat Status newsletter. And this episode of the Threat Status Podcast is brought to you by Leonardo DRS. Leonardo DRS is accelerating innovation to deliver technologies that help its customers stay ahead of the threat and own the edge. Hello and welcome to the Threat Status Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Wolfgang, national security correspondent at the Washington Times, and it's good to be back here on the show this week. I'm joined, as always, by my esteemed co-host, Guy Taylor, the national security editor here at the Times. And Guy is in Huntsville, Alabama this week, where he, along with John Seward and other members of our Threat Status team, have been doing some amazing exclusive reporting and podcast videos on the ground at the Space and Missile Defense Symposium in Huntsville. We'll have one of those interviews coming up later on this episode, which Guy will talk more about in just a second. But Guy, before we go any further, what's on your radar this week in Huntsville?
Thanks, Ben. I'm glad you're back hosting this week. In a whirlwind week, it's been. I've been running our special Threat Status Operation Huntsville reporting project here in Alabama at the annual Space and Missile Defense Symposium this week. The symposium is a major convergence every year of top U.S. Space Force officials, Pentagon missile defense officials, and hundreds of defense contractors, including all the major primes. I literally just ran to our taping here from an exclusive video interview shoot we just did with Jamin Brown, the head of missile defense development operations in Huntsville for Lockheed Martin. We talked about terminal high altitude aerial defense, THAAD, and Patriot missile defense systems and the billions of dollars the Pentagon is currently spending to try and accelerate munitions production for those systems amid the kind of shocking munitions depletion that the U.S. military is facing right now due to the Ukraine and Iran wars. That exclusive video will be on the Threat Status pages at the Washington Times in the days ahead. The highlight at the Space and Missile Defense Symposium, Ben, was a speech that Space Force General Michael Gutlein gave here on August 11. Gutlein is the handpicked director of President Trump's $180 or so billion Golden Dome for America futuristic space-based missile defense shield project. Threat Status is John Seward, who's been running around really like a dog here all week. Ben wrote a deep dive on that speech in which General Gutlein, surprisingly, given the secrecy around the technical architecture of Golden Dome, revealed, or I guess I should say claimed, that the U.S. military has actually already carried out 2 operations tests of the Golden Dome system. The nature of these tests is classified. Go check out our story on exactly what Gutlein said about that. Of course, our exclusive interview later in the show here is from John Seward sitting down with Lieutenant General Brian Gibson. He's Gut Lane's deputy for the Golden Dome project. He's right in the middle of this whole space-based missile defense situation. We also sat down for an interview with Lieutenant General John Rafferty, the commander of U.S. Army Missile Defense, which, in case you didn't know, is actually headquartered here on Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville. General Rafferty took us inside the reality and challenges of managing U.S. soldiers amid this current moment of hyper-fast evolving technology. Ben, all the stuff we've been reporting, the videos, the stories for our Operation Huntsville are coming out on the Threat Status web pages. And finally, we announced down here that Threat Status is going to be hosting a major Golden Age of Space special networking and reporting event with top U.S. military officials, senators, defense industry leaders on November 17. So stay tuned for all of that.
Space and missile defense, it's hard to imagine topics that are, more sort of top of mind or important in the national security ecosystem right now. So, I mean, against that backdrop, Guy, what were some of the major themes that you were hearing at the symposium down there in Huntsville?
So 3 major themes, Ben. One, why does the U.S. need to spend so much money on futuristic missile defense? Because of the breakdown of great power diplomacy on missile defense and the rise of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea missile threats and technology aimed at the U.S. General Stephen Whiting, the head of U.S. Space Command, gave a speech here about Chinese military moves in space. A second major theme, Ben, was really the question of, is this growing need right now to spend on conventional munitions replenishment, is that going to deplete funding for futuristic projects like Golden Dome? It's an open question. There was a lot of kind of behind the scenes discussion about that. And then 3, there's a ton of optimism right now in the missile defense private contractor world about a kind of, actually also hear it from top U.S. military officials, about a kind of unprecedented collaboration that's going on right now between competing defense contracting primes, Lockheed Martin, RTX, Northrop Grumman, L3 Harris, Leonardo DRS, others. That was pretty interesting because it's almost like we're at the beginning of the second quarter of the 21st century, and you can hear it, especially when you talk to the younger leaders in the weapons industry world, that like they're looking at a level of collaboration with their competitors that hasn't been there in recent decades.
It's fascinating. I've heard some folks describe it as a new wave of patriotism, quote unquote, that's sort of infecting the entire defense industrial base in terms of wanting to work together and being willing to work together towards common goals. We'll see if that continues moving forward, because there's certainly some big projects to tackle.
Also, just the presence when you come and cover a defense show like this. When you're talking about missile defense, you're talking about some of the top mathematicians, physicists, scientists, and engineers that are working in that industry. So there's this like triad of academic development, government, private industry towards the science that goes into this stuff. That's always blows my mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I mean, the defense industry is changing, and there was more news about the Pentagon's investment and equity strategy, which, as listeners, I'm sure at this point know, is one of my favorite issues to talk about because of the long-term ramifications it'll have for the defense and critical materials industries, and also because I don't think enough people in the media are writing about it and talking about it. And to me, it's a pretty big deal. The Pentagon has taken at least its fifth direct equity stake in a private company. This time it's spending $85 million to, in conjunction with private capital, buy a bauxite mine in Guyana. I'll confess to the listeners, I had to Google bauxite. If you don't know, bauxite is a sedimentary rock that serves as the world's primary ore for aluminum. And the military uses it to make high temperature resistant materials for heat shields, thermal barriers, turbine engines in missiles, rockets, military aircraft, and space systems.
Ben, here in Huntsville this week, I was able, with our threat status video team and with Jason Sickles, the head of Threat Status Partnerships, we actually got inside the United Launch Alliance's facility where they make the so-called Vulcan Centaur space rocket. And the amount of amazing aluminum crafting that goes on, in the sheer volume of the highest quality aluminum that's on display in this massive factory in Huntsville, that also blew my mind.
Well, it's important. I mean, that's a great example of why this kind of stuff is important, right? Because as with most critical materials, bauxite being one of them, as we've talked about many times in this show, the supply and processing of it has been dominated by China for the better part of a couple decades now. So the U.S. is trying to change that, in this case, by actually buying the source, the mine in Guyana. And the Pentagon's going to buy it, expand it, and basically build from the ground up a new bauxite supply chain to deliver that kind of aluminum for projects that Guy was just talking about. So companies that make stuff that needs bauxite can now get it directly from a Pentagon-owned mine, presumably, rather than buy from Chinese suppliers. So we say this all the time, Guy, on this show, but I hope these words don't lose their meaning because they're true. The defense and critical materials industries are being transformed before our eyes. I mean, the government, the Pentagon, the Commerce Department, other agencies are partially taking ownership of the means of production. Now, is that good or bad? I mean, listeners, I think, can decide on their own whether they think that's the right way to go. But it's definitely not the way we've done business before, primarily.
But you also, I think, listeners just need to pull out a quick Google map and they'll see the size of the border that Guyana shares with Venezuela, where the Trump administration's so-called Don Roe doctrine has seen its most action with the toppling of Venezuelan former president Nicolas Maduro in the U.S. Special Forces raid that unfolded there a few months ago.
Yeah, I mean, this issue is present now across all sorts of other geopolitical and foreign policy. I mean, it's center of the Trump administration trying to get critical minerals in Ukraine, for example, was a part of the peace push the Trump administration mounted there as well. So it's kind of everywhere, ubiquitous almost at this point. Quickly, Guy, I do want to touch on the U.S.-Iran war, which seems to be kind of at a standstill right now. Our colleagues Tom Howell and Vaughn Caucame, in one of their stories this week, described President Trump as being trapped in a doom loop on Iran. And I love that description so much because it's true. The loop is attacks, counterattacks by the U.S., destruction, the expenditure of more munitions and missile interceptors at a time when the supply of those is getting really, really low. And then a declaration from President Trump that we're holding off on new strikes because we're back in diplomacy with the Iranians. And then Iran fires on a ship in the Strait of Hormuz or does something else that leads to a response, and the loop begins all over again. The problem now, or one of them, is that hardliners in Tehran seem to be getting more power and influence and potentially getting more aggressive in their dealings, or more confident, at least, in their dealings with the U.S. Vaughn Caucame wrote about that in detail as well this week, and I'd encourage listeners to go read his story. So we'll see what happens, because this war is now nearing the 6-month mark, which by President Trump's own admission is a lot longer than he anticipated it lasting. But there's another matter, Guy, related to Iran that really caught my eye, and I've highlighted it all week in the Threat Status daily newsletter. And that's the fact that Iran seems to have had some really detailed intelligence on President Trump's whereabouts in Ankara, Turkey, last month during the NATO summit there. The New York Times reported the Iranians knew what hotel floor President Trump was staying on in Ankara. And of course, listeners have probably read the news this week, first reported by the Washington Post, that the president was moved in a catering container from Air Force One to a military jet in Ankara because of fears that Iran or Iran-linked actors in Turkey would be able to hit the plane with a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and others, for the record, remained on Air Force One, the old Air Force One, not the new Qatari Air Force One, which is problematic in its own right because of reported lack of defensive measures. Look, I've been on Air Force One a bunch of times during the Obama presidency, so I'm personally not too worked up about whether it's the Secretary of State or a bunch of reporters being left on that plane. I actually do understand that. You can't just tell everyone there's a live Iranian threat against the president and start having news reports from the tarmac and everyone waiting to see if surface-to-air missiles are going to start flying around. That's just not a tenable situation. So I get that, and I understand it's easy to make fun of the idea of President Trump hidden inside a food truck. But the problem to me, Guy, is the Iranian intelligence aspect here. How did they know all of this? We know they have a good intelligence apparatus. It's frightening to me. We know Iran wants to kill Trump. That's no secret, but it looks to me this may have been the closest they've actually come to potentially being able to do it.
Lieutenant General Gibson is the Vice Director for Golden Dome for America at the Pentagon, reporting directly to Space Force General Mike Gutlein. Golden Dome, President Trump's signature project for U.S. Homeland Missile Defense, is a key topic here at Space and Missile Symposium in Huntsville, Alabama. General Gibson is a longtime air and missile defense professional in the U.S. Army himself, working with Patriots and other programs. General Gibson, welcome to the Threat Status Podcast.
Thanks. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
So I want to jump straight in, sir. I talked about your title there at the top, but that's a relatively new development this year. Give us a little bit of an understanding of what your role is in the Golden Dome program.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you asking. It's a fundamental different approach for the department, for sure, to establish these things. DRPMs, Direct Reporting Program Manager, we're one of several at the departmental level, where the department has tried to put something in different to get different outcomes for really big things. And we're one of those with Golden Dome. I'm a career air missile defense operator going on 35 years. This is my third time in the Pentagon, and I can attest to it that it's different. I live it and breathe it every day of my life. We're just a little over a year old, if you judge it from when General Gutlein was confirmed, a year from last month. And in that year, it's been from inside the fence where I work and inside the Pentagon. It has been a fundamental shift on getting after this really, really important topic. He'll tell you, he'll make some comments later in the conference, likely about the range of activity and how many folks he's engaged with and all the different times. But I can attest, both he and I and the rest of the team, there's nothing off limits for us to try and accomplish this mission, whether it's policy or speed, or just trying to get something so big that folks before us have envisioned to get done. So it's good to be part of that approach.
Sir, I feel like you're uniquely positioned to talk about this, but I want to ask, how do we balance missile defense priorities when we're talking about homeland defense and the defense that we need to do for our own facilities and personnel abroad? How does that factor into Golden Dome?
That's a really good question, right? This will be an Army perspective only, but it applies to the other services as well. You know, I've spent more than probably a decade of my life in the Middle East. I spent a lot of time in Europe fighting. I've spent a lot of time in the Pacific. And you have to have weapon systems like what you see today in Epic Fury that are absolutely lethal and that are designed the way they are for the reasons for which they are, to fight the away game, away from our shores. It gets wrapped up into sort of tactical level air missile defense, sometimes more regional. Aegis gets involved in this quite a bit, obviously, with the Navy and a whole bunch of other things we do at the national level. We are committed at Golden Dome to improve the defensive equation of this nation, to defend our homeland. And when we achieve that, those things that matter to the services and their air and missile defense forces that they can onboard to perhaps get different outcomes when they fight the away game, we are absolutely cognizant of trying to improve their foxhole also. But we're also not going to, in the process of doing this, automatically make it worse for the United States and the joint force to prosecute the things that we have to prosecute around the globe today. So there's a balance, a long way of saying there's a balance. And we're focused on Golden Dome of, obviously, time is of the essence because of no other reason than you look at what adversaries are doing around the globe. And geography doesn't keep us safe the way it did in the past. But we're also equally focused on get something out there as soon as practical and quickly, but also don't take our eyes off the longer term of fundamentally getting new technologies into the air missile defense arena. And whether that be directed energy, whether that be a range of other things. So it's a balance internal to the program as well of the here and now versus the future, but also a balance across the joint force. Do not decrease the lethality in the way they fight. external to this United States, even though some of the capabilities we're going to ingest, perhaps maybe in a different way for some of the current kit. It's going to be it's a day-to-day balance that we keep our eyes on very closely.
So you mentioned it being a little bit of an equation there, and you talked about new technologies. From your foxhole right now, where you sit, how does it look trying to hit that cost curve of making missile defense, whether it's here at home or away, more effective at a lower cost to defeat those threats?
Yeah, you hit the fundamental thing, and confident in you bringing this up, that the way we have approached the fight for missile defense cannot be the way we have to continue to approach this fight. We can't afford it. Part of that's just cost. But afford is more than just cost. Afford is time. Afford is integration. Afford is application between services, doing things differently. So we are focused on changing the cost curve for the air missile defense fight through this effort. We've got to increase magazine depths, and we've got to achieve lower cost per kills. This isn't because we can't. And General Gutlein often says this is an organizational, cultural thing more than this is a technology thing. Now, certainly, there are incredible technologies we're trying to bring to bear, but we are very focused, especially in the next generation side of things and capabilities, to get after this fundamental tension of cost and depth.
You mentioned the next generation of things a couple times, and like I said, you talked about new technologies. One of the things I've already seen at the conference is basically like an upgraded version of CRAM, which for folks listening is basically like a machine gun style cannon that can take stuff out of the sky.
It's a good description.
I try. But when I look at things like that, I've also done a lot of reporting on autonomous drones and drones that are now being designed to even go after those threats that are in the air. What does it look like for y'all to integrate some of those into Golden Dome, or is it even part of the program since those are more sort of close to the ground?
There is nothing off the plate from a Golden Dome perspective for defending this nation. So it's a very broad swath of our focus and vision on what we're seeking to achieve. One of the fundamental things is we have to defend the defender. I think the war in Ukraine and Epic Fury highlights again the necessity of, especially the big things that you're using to defend whatever you're defending from a counter-UAS perspective or lower tactical threat perspective, need to be defended. But for Golden Dome, it's not just getting the next GWIS effector. It's not getting just the next upgraded laser. There's a whole range of scientific and developmental things as well that may not even be hardware-based, and this combination of trying to flip this equation for next gen. I often, it's easy to talk about terms of closed architectures, open architectures, interoperable versus integrated, but it's hard to visualize that sometimes. We're trying to make a smarter brain for sure inside a Golden Dome to get different outcomes. And with advanced technologies infused with artificial intelligence and machine learning to increase the capability of our deciding in speed. The new threats don't afford us the same amount of time to decide. The quantity of them, the physics of those threats, the geography of the safety of the oceans don't provide us the same standoff we had before. So the ability to decide faster and better, I think it's pretty true in a lot of applications in the United States military. It's no different here for Golden Dome. We're focused on that. So when folks get, well, what's the thing? There's not just a thing, there's multiple things that we're focused on for sort of next generation infusion of capabilities.
Part of what I'm hearing you talk about, sir, is, like you said, the brain. Yeah. It's actually focusing more on software, on signals, on combining all of these things into a system that makes the decision faster on where to defend and how to defend, sort of what threat to get after. I want to ask where the overlap is between these two topics we've kind of started to discuss, of the cost curve and that decision and making those decisions faster. Is Is that part of why there's this sort of back and forth over what Golden Dome will cost? Is because there's more effort placed in some of that decision aspect and less in the hardware, or is it more things that we're not open and free to talk about here, and sort of the what we would call left of launch, right? Getting after it before it's in the air.
Yeah, there's certainly a range of variables. There's two big most that have been out there for how much the program will cost. A lot of those, most of those, in fact, those two specifically were developed without asking our opinion. And I'm not pointing fingers or pushing back, but we're fully transparent to the level that we can be. Now, in the open press, we haven't talked a lot about it because the threat's real. And just not the threat to the homeland. The threat to the people involved in the program, right? The locations of how and what, those kind of things. So we're very cognizant about protecting this before we even field it. So the world has shown us for decades that we talk a lot about what we do for a lot of good reasons. In this case, initially, we've taken a different approach. And that's been a fundamental decision to do so, to protect what we're trying to do, given this activity. But to the costs, it's not as easy as taking, for example, Guam. We, the United States military, are defending Guam. We're putting a bunch of kit out there. Some of that may be similar, not all of it. We'll use it differently, some of it, maybe none of it. But my point is, you can get a cost estimate for what's the government spent on it. $8 billion or whatever the newest number is tomorrow, right? And that's a fraction of the size of the United States, a very tiny fraction. One of those decided just to multiply how much it costs to defend Guam and multiply it times 300 or 400 or whatever the number is for how small Guam is compared to the United States to come up with a cost estimate. We are not, that's not a practical, in my perspective, that's not a practical way to arrive at what we're trying to achieve. The other way is on the Congressional Budget Office estimate that came in. I think the first paragraph says this is a notional architecture, or maybe the second or third paragraph says this is our opinion based on how we've done it as a military and the systems at hand. And the third one was we didn't ask Golden Dome. I'll just assure you that $185 billion is our target. That's what we're sticking to. And General Gutlein is laser focused on if things are not affordable and scalable, we are not going to do it. Because we take it serious from Congress, the amount of money that they are investing in this effort to get a fundamental difference. The other thing that gives me some confidence in this to achieve today Golden Dome for America by defending the homeland, we have done this throughout our history, defended our country. We have coastal artillery batteries that have ringed the country to include out to Hawaii. We have Nike Herc sites from Key West to Chicago to New York to Washington, D.C. to all across the West Coast, some of which were nuclear tipped at the time. We had over 100 surface-to-air missile sites in the early 50s to 60s. Right, so this is in our history, this is in our culture to defend our homeland by integrated air missile defense ways. So we've done it before, we can do it again, we're gonna do it again. But we're gonna do it in a way, hopefully, that not only achieves the here and now, but fundamentally gives us a different approach for years in the future at the sort of the national level. So we don't get stuck in the way we find ourselves today, which is the only kit you have is the kit for the away game, which is incredibly exquisite, incredibly lethal and effective. But this isn't about putting a bunch of Patriot batteries and THAAD batteries around major United States cities. Right. Or Aegis destroyers off our coast. We could, absolutely, based on the threat, we could do that today, but our approach is not that.
The landscape that you're painting here, sir, is very interesting because at the top, you're talking about having all of the options on the table. Yeah. You're talking about being very deliberate in that if something isn't scalable and cost effective, that you're not even going to, sort of humor that as an option. Since we're here at a major defense conference, I want to ask from your perspective, from the military's perspective, what that relationship looks like with industry. How has having so much flexibility but being so focused on cost changed that relationship that you're seeing for Golden Dome and for folks that are trying to provide some of these solutions?
Right. In the past, we took an approach. I'm an operator, not an acquirer, so parts of this may be fundamentally to the letter of the law inaccurate. Don't hold that against me. I have a secret Dakota rig I sort of laugh about. I've been around the acquisition corps a lot. I'm old, so I understand it. In the past, we would pay a defense contractor from birth to death to figure it out. And then we would incentivize them over a period of time based on how they're developing and performing. That grew, and we didn't incentivize speed real well a lot of times, or the ability to take more risk earlier in the program. And a lot of times, for the right reasons, I think, is that the government not giving multi-year demand signals to industry, and that changing year over year or administration over administration makes it difficult for industry who have to respond to their shareholders to invest on their own dime, right? So it's a constant struggle inside of business that they have to deal with. What we've done this time is we've established I'll give you an example on our command and control capability we're developing. We've established a consortium. That consortium is made up of a number of companies who are equal partners in order to approach what we're asking them to do. So it's not a single vendor. It is built on being incentivized that they can get voted off the island by the other partners, right? Peer pressure is a really good thing sometimes. Sure. It can be very effective even at this national strategic level. But also, they'll be paid based on how they do, not paying them up front for what they are doing in the same model, in the same way in which we've done it in the acquisition corps in the past. So that's one example. Build a construct that allows collaboration and teamwork to automatically start from the get-go. They've got skin in the game, both financially, reputationally, from a here and now perspective, but also in the future. And they're part of something really big, right? Have we ever tried something called Golden Dome for America before? Some people would argue that the Strategic Defense Initiative under Reagan was sort of the instantiation of this and other things. But this isn't like building a new bullet, or building a new M16 for the Army, or a new 155 shell, or whatever. This is fundamentally different and not something that we do a lot of. So our approach is cognizant of that. And with our partners, whether it's on the C2 consortium, as I just alluded to, or something else, there's a lot at stake here, and a lot of folks and our teammates in industry have been phenomenal partners who realize that as well, and they want to be part of it.
General Gibson, thank you, sir, for sitting down, talking with us, giving us a little bit of a peek behind the Golden Dome curtain. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And this is about protecting the entirety of this country, where we live, where we work, where we sleep, where we play. It's something that time is now. So I'm grateful to be part of it. And thanks for letting me be part of the interview.
This episode of the Threat Status Podcast is brought to you by Leonardo DRS. Leonardo DRS is accelerating innovation to deliver technologies that help its customers stay ahead of the threat and own the edge.
And it's time now for Threat of the Week, our weekly segment here in the show where Guy and I each identify a threat, whether it's here at home domestically or in some corner of the world that we think is impacting U.S. national security right now this week as you all listen to the show. Guy, what do you have for us as your Threat of the Week?
My threat of the week is that while the U.S. in the Trump era is pursuing a peace through strength approach to global security stability by setting up for spending record amounts of U.S. taxpayer money on things like naval shipbuilding and futuristic missile defense, the administration does not appear to be putting the necessary muscle behind robust security diplomacy with the so-called CRINCs, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, to create a 21st century fabric of missile development red lines and agreements. Without that diplomatic side fabric, the threat of escalation and more and more and more spending looms.
My threat of the week is potential spying abroad on key U.S. military installations and what that means for U.S. national security. Yonhap News Agency reported this week that 2 former Chinese military officers were arrested after allegedly spying on U.S. bases in South Korea. And Asia editor Andrew Salmon here at the Washington Times did some more reporting on this story as well and explained in detail who they were and exactly how they were trying to get their information, including one of the instances in which one of the men tried to recruit a female at Camp Humphreys to supply classified information about joint war games. So Camp Humphreys was one alleged target. That's the largest U.S. military base in the world outside the continental United States, houses U.S. Forces Korea, the U.S. 8th Army, a bunch of other key assets. Kunsun Air Base was the other apparent target, allegedly. It's no surprise that China wants information on how these bases operate or the war games that are conducted out of them. That would obviously give Beijing information about U.S. military planners and how they're thinking about potential clashes in the Pacific with China. But it's still a big threat. These things matter. Every bit of intelligence China has on U.S. military operations would help them in a potential conflict. But what's interesting to me is in the age of AI and hacking and cyber attacks, that's often where our minds go when we talk about these kinds of threats. But this is an instance that seems to be, an example of good old-fashioned human spying, a human being trying to get information out of another one. And we shouldn't lose sight of that even in 2026 and beyond. That's why it's my threat of the week. So with that, thanks, Guy. It's great to be back here on the show. A huge thanks to you. Thanks to John Seward, Jason Sickles, David Gordon, Nathan Peoples, everybody else from the Threat Status team down there in Huntsville, Alabama, for all the great work you've been doing. And thanks so much to Lieutenant General Gibson for joining John Seward here on the show this week. And most of all, thanks to all of you, our listeners. Please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and share with all of your friends. Guy and I will be back next week on the Threat Status Podcast.